Welcome to the A.R. Bernard Show, where we explore the intersection of faith and culture. I'm your host, A.R. Bernard. It's great to have you here. And I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. She is a prolific director, writer, and producer. Please welcome Christine Swanson.
Hi, Pastor. Glad to be here.
It is my pleasure to have you on the program and to talk about your unique background and experience. And I think the background is where I'd like to start. You were raised in Detroit, Korean mother and African-American father. So let's start there. Let's talk about the community that you grew up in and your relationship with your parents.
Well, my father was 27 years in the Air Force, and he found himself stationed in Korea where he met my mother. And while I was born in North Dakota, we moved around a lot because of the military. I eventually spent the first 6 years of my life in Korea. So I only spoke Korean, and for all intents and purposes, I thought I was a Korean child. And then my father got restationed to Florida, and I came to America not speaking a lick of English. And my parents ended up getting divorced. And then my father retired from the military and moved me and my brother up to Detroit with him. So my mom left us with our Black father. So I was raised by a single Black man, and in his wisdom, he moved us to Detroit where his mother lived. So then I was also supported by my grandmother and then her sister, my great aunt, who ended up raising me. And these are women in their mid-60s from Mississippi who, after raising their own children, found themselves taking in two more children, biracial kids, by the way, in Detroit. And then when I just learned English, and then when I landed in Detroit, I thought, I don't know what this language these kids are speaking. And it scared me. They were speaking Ebonics, and I didn't know the language, so I kind of stay muted for the next 2 years until I could get the hang of slang.
The Hang of Slang. Okay.
Yeah,
That sounds like a film, but let
yeah,
me,
yeah, yeah.
I'm talking to a producer here. What was that like? I mean, how old were you when you got to Detroit?
I was 8 years old, in the third grade, I recall, and and mind you, at that point, I was motherless, and we lived in Florida, my brother and I, for a couple years without our mother, and like that's a movie in and of itself because I think it was kind of like a Lord of the Flies experience
Hmm.
with a single Black man. In hindsight, managing depression um, and without really dealing with it in a helpful way. We were three abandoned people who had to figure life out differently.
How
And
did you work through? I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I'm just curious to know how you worked through the identity crisis because here your early years are in Korea. You're speaking
yeah,
Korean language,
right,
but at the same time, you don't look like a Korean would look in the
right,
context you were growing up in. But
right,
that's all you knew
right.
was who you were, and then you come to the U.S.
Hmm.
Experience the separation of your mother and father, and end up in an African American context, essentially. Uh,
Hmm.
Unpack that for me. What was that like?
Well, when I was in Korea, I was really being raised by my grandmother and her sister. So it's like two older Korean women eventually ended up passing me off to two older Black women, and it's
Hmm.
just so profound the lyricism of that. But I didn't know I was not Korean when I was in Korea, so all my Korean relatives treated me like one of theirs,
Hmm.
and conversely, I didn't know I was not Black when I was in Detroit, short of the children in the neighborhood who constantly called me Chinese. So that's just childhood bullying. But my Detroit relatives, my Black family members, took me in as one of their own. And at a certain point, I think I made a conscious decision that I could no longer subscribe to being Korean because that is a culture that I no longer had access to
Hmm.
or support with. So a part of my uh, mental faculty shut that down. And just for the sole goal of surviving, I was like, I better embrace this Black thing and pretty
Hmm.
quick. And so I'm culturally Black from the point of like 7 to 8 to now. But there's a part of me that I know in my most formative years that I'm 6 years Korean.
Hmm. That is not, I don't want to say not normal. That's not the usual experience that someone
It's not.
has. Gosh, look, my father was white. My mother's Black African descendant from those who came to the Caribbean
Mm,
and in Antigua, and then went to Panama to get jobs on the canal zone. So I understand what it means to grow up as a multiracial child
mhm.
and faced with the issue of identity and having to, at
Right,
the end of the day, because of the American context, born in Panama, came to the United States, and then was in America. I was in
right.
Brooklyn,
Yeah,
Bed-Stuy,
right.
so I had to make a decision as to how I identified, and
Absolutely.
that was clearly within African American culture. As you grew up within that culture, was there any difficulty readjusting?
Which culture?
From the
Black
Korean
culture?
context? Yeah, into
Yeah.
into culture from Korea.
So it's again, the hardest part was dealing with children who did not understand what biracial meant.
Mm,
Because where I grew up in Detroit, 8 Mile and Livernois, it's nobody but Black folks lived there. So I looked like an other. And when you're an other, you stick out. And when you stick out, they make it a point to let you know that you're different. So that was the biggest obstacle I probably had to deal with. But that was external, that was outside my home. Inside my home, everybody was Black, you
mm,
know? So there was never an issue of identity when it came to love. And my grandmother and my great aunt, God bless them, they were women of faith. And if nothing else, while they're trying to figure out like what I am, I was going to church with them every Sunday. They're a big part of the reason why that I have a deep foundation of faith. And if I were to look back on my life and see the steps that I took, I I always saw God's hand. I always
mm,
saw God's hand. It was like it may not be comfortable uh, to break your family up in this way, but I'm doing something. And in me doing something, there's going to be something deposited in you that is going to be eternally beneficial.
mm.
And something like that you don't understand when you're young and you're living it. But in hindsight, I'm not sure that I would change anything, however hard.
Yeah, and I understand that because my own journey was quite difficult because my father rejected my mother and I at my
Mm,
birth,
wow.
and we came to the United States when I was like 4 years old, and I couldn't speak a word of English, only Spanish.
Wow.
And then at that time, it was about assimilating into American culture. So you
Right.
wanted to lose the language to
Right.
become as American as you can be. And in the context that I was in, as African American
Mm,
as you can be, you factor in God. God came along later in my life because
mm,
I was born into Catholicism. That was my
mm.
family faith. But early on, the Black church's influence was already taking hold in your identity, your worldview. Talk about that.
Yeah, so my grandmother went to Methodist church and my great aunt went to an AME church. Go figure. But one of the things that I just always felt, even when I lived on the military base in Florida, and immediately after my mother, and it's an interesting thing because my mother is Korean. admitted to me that she married my father to come to America.
Mm.
And then once she got here, she's way younger than my dad as well. She felt that she wanted to live a life of her own. And the only way that she could figure out how to do that was to divorce him. And while she wanted to take us with her, my father wouldn't allow her to do that. So he chose us,
Mm.
and that's one of the beautiful things. He's since deceased, but that I know about my father is he wanted us, and my whole life I knew I was adored by him. And when we were on the military base in Florida, there was a pastor of a church, of a local Baptist church. He would drive on the military base with a school bus and pick up all the military kids and take them to church or Sunday school. And my father, I never saw him go to church, but he would wake us up, get us ready, give us 2 quarters in our hands, and make sure we got on that bus. So we were all already introduced to a, a life of faith unwittingly, and that just became a natural part of who my upbringing. And then when I moved to Detroit, and my grandmother and her sister were always at church, we were always at church with them. So it was kind of like we were forced to go to church, but church became a special language that I learned, especially in the Black church,
Mm.
that allowed me a way to communicate um, in a, on a spiritual level, even though I didn't understand what was happening. I developed a closeness and a language with God and the Holy Spirit through the preaching, through Sunday school, through the music, and through the community of believers. And to this day, it's um, it's part of the foundation of who I am.
Our stories, we are America, essentially, because America is about immigrants,
Amen.
people coming from other parts of the world and establishing themselves in the context of this experiment in democratic republic. And, our stories are the American story. Speak to what you see happening in our nation. We're quite polarized.
Mhm.
Issues around race and the divisions that brings about. We are now revisiting uh, racial identity as a
Mhm.
social construct, uh,
Yes.
essentially what it is and what it has been to enforce a class system. How do you see it, considering your journey?
Well, biblically speaking, I'm not surprised with the turmoil that we are experiencing, and I expect that it's going to get worse. And even within the last 2, 3 years, there's just been a lot of escalation of misunderstanding on purpose. Like people are committed to their own um, belief system in a way that denies others
Mm.
uh, their liberty, their values, and their ways of expression. And increasingly, it's the, oh, we only have so many pieces of the pie, and I'm gonna get mine before you take yours.
Mm.
And again, it's a scarcity mentality, and it's just ironic because I grew up very modest. My dad went from military to being a factory foreman, so very blue collar. Like I grew up, and the only expectation for us was just to go to college. If we could just go to college, that would be enough. Um, and I did that, and they could not be more proud, right? But I didn't just go to college. I went to the University of Notre Dame, and I went there debt free. My father was able to send me there on his military pension and his factory foreman salary. And then I went on to the NYU graduate film school. Um, so I went to elite schools um, from Detroit, Michigan, and so I got exposed to oh, this is how the other half lives, right? And it's interesting. The funny thing is when I graduated from Notre Dame, it's you're young and you're impressionable and you're gonna just go for it and the world's your oyster. And I felt like I came out of undergrad with more conservative leaning values, you
Mhm.
know, like,
Mhm.
it's really about entrepreneurship and building wealth and making sure that our country is not taxing overly taxing us and things like that. And in hindsight, the older version of myself looks at the younger version of myself, and I'm like, oh, that's I had a scarcity mentality. I felt that I was entitled to a certain lifestyle, and the world owed me something, and that's and I look at the world today and I feel like, oh, everybody feels they're owed something.
Entitlement. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that is, I think that's a lack of love issue, and that's a lack of understanding issue, and that's a lack of understanding your own grace issue. And it's only by the grace of God that I was able to evolve in a way where I think I have a completely different perspective than I started out. And a lot of that came from suffering.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But your
You know?
journey is interesting. I mean, you go from a Korean context into a spirituality of the Black church.
Yes,
You end up going to a Catholic university,
sure
Notre
did.
Dame, right?
Yes,
And then graduate school in a secular context,
right.
NYU.
That's right.
And all of these ideas of what it means to be human, what it means to live in this world,
Yeah,
are being influenced along the way,
right.
and you end up at a certain place. Uh,
Mhm.
how much influence did that journey have on you as a creative? You're a producer. You've done some incredible things. Uh, how much influence did it have on shaping your activities in the creative industries?
So when I lived in Detroit, I went to Detroit public schools through the sixth grade. And my brother was a year older than me, and when he graduated in the sixth grade, my dad decided to take him out of Detroit public schools and put him in a Catholic school because he experienced severe bullying for a lot of different reasons. And so my great aunt, who was my grandmother's sister, worked at a Catholic rectory. So she talked to the priest and who led her to the principal of the grade school, and they allowed my brother and me later to attend the grade school, the Catholic grade school, for free. And then when we ended up going to the Catholic high school, we were allowed to go there and pay in parish tuition. So that was like the first act of charity that I had personally experienced, and it was from and through a Catholic church. And so I ended up going to Catholic schools from seventh grade through college. And when I was in grammar school, we had to go to mass every week. So I was going to mass every week at school, and I was going to church every Sunday. My Oak Grove AME church. So I was exposed to like different religious approaches, and what I always kind of admired about the Catholic approach was because there was always this sense of it was a quietness. So the Catholic Church was quiet, and the Black Church was not. And I was exposed to both every week, and that just made me like who I am spiritually. And
Right.
to this day, I have a great appreciation for Catholics. And it's funny because in our religious world, people want to say, "Well, are they really Christians?" And my question is, "Are you?"
So, Christine, that was your first experience with charity, the Catholic
Yes.
school. How did you respond to that?
I didn't know to respond to that. I really didn't understand. I didn't understand it much later how all of that came about. How I ended up at a suburban Catholic school with now mostly white kids. I'd been going to Detroit public schools with all Black kids, and then my whole world changed. It flipped, and now I'm going to a suburban school with mostly white kids. So it was just a culture shock for me at the time, and that was seventh grade. So Again, I didn't understand that what the setup was, but in hindsight, as I look back on the generosity that was extended to our family, I'm astounded by how that worked out, and I'm moved by how God's hand was on our lives through the generosity of Catholic priests and nuns.
Hmm. Hmm. I,
So,
so you go through all of this, and I'm looking at
mhm,
several culture shocks here, and
yeah,
I'm sure that's shaping and informing and challenging your notion of race and racial identity.
sure,
But you've continued to be clear, identifying yourself as African American, correct?
mhm, yes.
All right. So, all right, I get NYU, and
Mhm.
that was film, but why film? Why did you go into film?
So, remember those 2 years I said when I landed in Detroit, I said I didn't talk for, like, 2 years, mainly out
Hmm.
of fear and also because my brain was processing this new language. And sometimes when you experience, silence and extreme observation,
Hmm.
it just kinda I think it shifts the way your brain functions, right? So, I didn't realize this. I can analyze this in hindsight. So, I was just an observer of people, observer of language, observer of movement, observer of nuance, like what's not being said. That's what I love about Black folks is they say a lot, but sometimes they don't say everything. And there's a lot that has to be understood. And this is what I saw the richness of Black culture almost through the lens of a foreigner.
Hmm.
And fast forward to this day when I'm telling stories about Black people, I know I have a unique perspective that I don't see in the landscape because people who are typically in charge of telling stories about us don't see us the way that I see us. And it's palpable. And it's in many ways annoying to me and it just doesn't get it right, you know. It's like it's like our music. Like when we're doing our music and you know when others are doing our music. So anyway, I learned an extreme form of observation and I find that to be incredibly useful as a storyteller, as a writer, as a director. I'm able to see things that the masses can't and don't, and I can tell stories in a way that quickly connects with the culture.
Hmm.
Uh, in a way that I think is unique. And I'm gonna stop comparing myself to the world. It's just there's no comparison. It's just what I do, and it's something that was developed, and I just believe this is where God led me. So when I was a freshman at the University of Notre Dame, remember all my dad wanted us to do was go to college. And I was like, okay, I'm at college now. What do I study? And
Hmm.
he's like, well, what are you asking me for? I don't know. And I thought, geez, I don't know what to do here. So I just signed up for finance. Kids at Notre Dame study finance. They go directly into middle management in corporate America. So I'm like, well, I'll do that. I didn't know what finance was, right? So I took my first econ course and I just thought they were speaking Greek. And I knew I sat there and I'm like, I'm in trouble. I don't know what this is. I don't know what major I chose. I don't know why. And then my first semester at Notre Dame, Spike Lee came to campus to talk about Do the Right Thing. And as I was listening to him speak, I kid you not, I thought, people make movies for a living?
Hmm.
I did not know that. You know, unlike here in Southern California, kids, well, in America now, they're exposed to storytelling, film, and TV. Growing up in Detroit, I just went to the movies. And I enjoy them a lot. And it was one of the safer places where our parents could drop us off and they picked us up 5 hours later. And so what I did all the time with my cousins, we would watch 2 and 3 movies, like back to back to back to back. didn't know that I was learning film or cinematic language in the movie theater, right? So when Spike Lee came to campus, I thought, I don't know what this is, but this is what I'm going to do. So I immediately, my husband too, we both went to Notre Dame, and he was a government major, and we both changed our majors to film production. And I focused on really cinema and film theory and film aesthetic. And I started to get a history and an education about filmmaking. And I had maybe one black professor. I had two probably, but the first black professor I had at Notre Dame taught a class on black images in film and TV. And that just opened my world in terms of meaning. So it was not just, hey, let's put ourselves on camera. This class taught me what are the implications of our images and storytelling on in this medium, and how does that travel across the world, and what are the implications of that. So I
You,
learned that early on.
you understood the power of that platform.
I did unwittingly. You know what
Mhm.
I'm saying? I didn't. Yes, but I didn't know that's what I was doing.
So
But
let me ask
yeah,
you a question, because I want to get this right, because it says a production company that focuses on projects that have moral resonance, universal appeal, as well as commercial viability.
yes,
Moral resonance.
yeah.
Why?
That's the DNA of who I am, and that's a euphemism for things dealing with faith, things grappling with theological perspectives, um, unpacking how we are connected universally with a power source greater than us.
Talking like a Catholic, you know that.
A little bit, I'm conversant. I'm conversant, um, and really tying us back to what who we are and what our purpose is.
Hmm.
And for me personally, there's no purpose outside of God. There just isn't. So, but one of the things I hate the most is I hate faith-based movies.
You know you're going to have to explain that, right?
Yeah. So, and I've been guilty of being a part of some of them. Somewhere along the way, post Passion of the Christ, a bunch of people of faith realized that, oh my gosh, we can tell stories about Jesus and make a whole lot of money doing it. So you got the wrong players, with the goal of capitalizing on
Hmm.
this new market, jumping into storytelling. And there's an influx of a lot of faith based movies that are Pollyannish, really poor production value, um, melodramatic, cringeworthy storytelling that has happened, and they made a lot of money doing it. You
That's
know
a
what?
strong word. That's a strong critique there.
Oh yeah, I've
You
been
know.
saying this for years. I won't back down, and they know who they are, and they don't care because they're like, well, this is what our audience wants, and I'm like, yes, so you think the audience is not capable of a better thought out story, or better acting, or better production value. So you think it's like let's just make chillins for the Negroes. They'll eat
Mm.
it. Yes, they will eat it. We know this. But does it make it right? Does it make it right? So let's just say, like, I think the films have gotten better in terms of production value, but I think there's a reductive approach to storytelling pertaining to faith that to me just knocks people over the head. And what we're doing, and not we, let me take me out of it, but well, I'll say we as storytellers, we're preaching to the choir, and we're turning off really the people that I think we should be speaking to, and that is an audience of
Mhm.
one. It doesn't matter what they believe or don't believe, because the power of storytelling is that palpable that you can use this tool to say some things and to do some things. But if you're gonna turn off people, then you're gonna miss a majority of the people that I think that we really should be telling stories for.
Well, or you say it's Pollyannish. Is there a tension between um, telling the truth and telling it in a way that doesn't cross certain boundaries? I mean, I'm thinking of when you go through the process of creating some type of so-called faith-based film. You're saying, okay, how sex is real. How much of it is should be represented in my film? Violence, etc. You have all of these things, and
Mhm.
it seems to be a tension because you say, I don't want to show too much of that, or is that okay? What are the boundaries?
I think they're personal in nature, the boundaries, and I think, and that's why the Christian films, or the faith-based films, are they stay within a certain parameter, and there's no cursing, there's no sex, minimal violence, lots of praying,
Hmm.
um, and lots of proselytizing, um, and again, there's a market for that. It's actually very profitable. So I think I'm not going to criticize that, in that it's a business at the end of the day, and people want a return on their investment. All I'm My argument is it's a powerful medium that can be used in a great way if you know how to use the tools. That's it. If you know how to use the tools, and if you're challenged to do storytelling in a more elevated way. So
You are big on black film. There is an annual black film festival that is similar to the Sundance that many people are familiar with. Tell me about that.
yeah, so it's interesting because I think the American Black Film Festival was first called the Acapulco Black Film Festival, and it started in 1997. In 1998, I was a second year student at NYU, and I just made my first short film. And one of my professors was like, "There's this new festival. You should submit it." So I submitted my first short film into the HBO short film competition at the Acapulco Black Film Festival. Ironically, that's I met that year Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, and Debbie Allen.
Mm.
And my short film was in competition, and it ended up winning, right? And back then, like, the prize was a development deal at HBO. So I was a second year student at NYU. I won a development deal at HBO. I was in way over my head, didn't know what I was doing. I was thrown in these parties with stars and celebrities. And my husband and I, we were like, oh my gosh, we've made it. We have made it. And it was my first introduction into a film festival. And in hindsight, it was a wonderful place to be seen and celebrated, and never to be experienced on that level again, because that was our first introduction. So we were very virginal and wide-eyed, bushy-tail. And
Mm.
then once you get older and wiser, and you're like, boy, this business is hard. Oh, this business is rough. Oh my gosh, there's utter darkness sometimes. And I'm like, oh goodness, has God called us to do this?
Yeah.
So our emotions have run the gamut, but because of a film festival like ABFF, and now there are other great Black film festivals that have come up, like Essence and Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival. It's just a platform for us to tell our stories, see our stories, and then celebrate with each other our culture and the greatness within us. And sometimes we don't have enough opportunities to see that and to celebrate that. Now, I'm people party a lot too. And so, like, it's funny, for years we've been going to ABFF, and we get all these all access passes as filmmakers and as panelists. And like to this day, and I know it's shocking, I've never been to one of those parties that start at 11 p.m. at night, you know, because I'm in bed, and it's like, but so it's like being we're in it, but we're not of it.
Of it, yeah.
And it's
That
something that
sounds
is
biblical.
it's very livable and very doable, and we've been doing it for a long time.
So let me ask you a question. If you had all the money in the world and you could have available to you whatever platform you wanted, what would you produce?
Okay, because I was gonna stop it. If I had all the money in the world, I might bounce,
You
get out of
might
this
bounce
business.
completely from it. Okay. No,
Uh,
but if you had any platform available to you,
yeah. So
what
this
would
is
you produce?
I'm a filmmaker by training, so I came up in the era of going to movies, and I'm trained as a movie director, a filmmaker. So in versus television,
Hmm.
which ironically, that's my 9 to 5. I direct television ad nauseum, right? But I love the flexibility of that because I don't have the responsibility of a show. I just come in and direct an episode. Then here's your baby back. Then I'm off to another episode. And then, time permitting, the rest of the 5 months out of the year, I'm making my own movie. So that's the world that I would create. Is I'd be a movie director. Ad nauseum. I'm like Prince. I have hits for days. So there's a lot of movies and stories that I would love to tell. And then when my youngest child, graduates from high school, then I can jump into television, and because I'm a show creator, right? And like television, when you're overseeing a show, it's a 10-month gig
Hmm.
and it's nonstop. So I would never see my child, right? Whereas I do a movie a year, and then I direct some television, and then I can schedule my time accordingly. I actually get to see my children and raise them. So I have to add, I've been doing this for almost going on 30 years, right? Um, in those 30 years, 15 of those years, I was a stay at home mother and I raised my 4 children.
Hmm.
And and I call that, I said God gave me a 15-year timeout, because when I came out of NYU, I graduated at the top of my class. CNN did a news piece on the greatest thing to come out of NYU since Spike Lee and Martin Scorsese, and it was on me. And
Hmm.
I believed every bit of it. NYU believed it, and I was on my way. So when I made my first feature film, I became pregnant with my first son. And in my delusion, I thought, I can do both. And it just didn't work out for me, where I was creatively at my optimum. So, long story short, I kind of stepped out of the game to raise my son. And I say in my depression, I had 3 more kids, right? And at that point, I had to raise these kids, my husband as well, and every single day.
Wait. Hold on. You had to raise the kids and raise your husband?
No,
I thought my wife was the
my
only one
husband,
to
no, listen,
raise 8
we had
boys.
our own company, so he was a stay-at-home dad.
Hmm.
Like, one of the greatest gifts my oldest son has gotten is he had his mom and dad at home raising him. And if you were to look at my son today, and my son said this, he just graduated from NYU Film School, and he said to me, "Mom, I see the other kids, and I look at them, and I look at myself, and I realize the difference is I was raised
Hmm.
by parents. They were not, and it's obvious." And he said, "I just want to thank you for raising me." And you know what that does to a mother's heart. But I look at God, and every year that I was a little bit dis- disgruntled, because I would look at my peers, and I'm like, I'm a basketball player, I'm a competitor, and I'm like, man, I could do that. I'm better than him. And it was frustrating, like, to be like on the bench, right? um My youngest son, my third son, is graduating this evening from high school, and he's headed to USC. My second son, who's 21 years old, he's a sophomore at Stanford. You look at my children, and you will see investment of time, energy, love, resources, faith. I could not have done that working as a film professional.
Mm.
And the greatest thing that God did for me, remember I said I learned a lot through suffering, or what I would call suffering, is that God gave me a 15-year timeout. God gave me children that I didn't even ask for. I would not have known to ask for them because my ambition was so great. And there were so many great things that I felt that I could do in this industry that I probably would not feel that I should be bothered by children. And at the most, what, maybe one or two, few nannies, and I'd have a career. That didn't work out for me. Like, I never had the resources to have a nanny. Thank God. Thank God for my humble beginnings. So I was the nanny, and one of the greatest things I think I have done to date. And I've done a few movies here and there, and whatever. I direct television and this, that, and the other. But the greatest gift that God gave me was to pause, to have and raise my children. And
You're a strong believer in divine providence. I
I
can
am.
tell by how you understand the hand of God throughout your life. Christine, in our conversation, you used the word depression 3 times. Is
Sure.
that something that you actually went through
Yeah.
as a real mental health challenge?
Yes.
Tell me about that, if it's
Yeah.
okay.
I remember when my kids were all really young, and like it's just an overwhelming sadness that I would feel like every day. And in hindsight, what I know that was is that I felt out of place. Like, I felt a greater purpose in me, and I felt stuck.
Mm.
And imagine like having, again, let me just say humbly, because it's gonna come off arrogant, and I'm not. But I know what I am, and it's like having Michael Jordan level talent, and you're on the bench, or you're in the G League,
Hmm.
you know. And I just felt like that for years. Like, Lord, what's happening, and why do I feel this way? So I actually went into therapy for years to kind of deal with this overwhelming sadness. And ultimately the solution was that I had to accept that this is where I am in life for now.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I had to just allow myself the grace to be here until it's time to move on. And it certainly moved on. The kids grew up. And the irony of it is, now I'm crying because I miss them being babies.
That sounds familiar. It's like a voice at my home. My wife, because we had 7 sons, and
Mm,
like she raised all 8 of us. That's why I pointed
yeah.
out your comment about raising.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
and why? Because this generation has removed much of the stigma associated with mental health, especially in the Black community, especially
Yeah.
amongst Black men.
Yeah.
And the church has not done a great job
Sure.
responding to this issue. Talk a little bit about that. We're running out of time, but I see I can squeeze as much out of you. It's a great conversation we're having. Talk a little bit about mental health and the church and your faith and the role of faith with that.
Well, somewhere along the way, there was teaching, I would say, in the 90s that with faith, you should never get sick.
Yeah.
With faith, you should never be poor. With faith, depression, what's that? And I had to teach myself. Uh, Thankfully, God got me out of those teachings and to a more balanced understanding of how theology works.
Mhm.
And ultimately, it's in the suffering And it is in those low times that actually built up some sense of who I am through God's grace and mercy. And if I wasn't hitting the bottoms, I wouldn't know to reach out to God to get through those low points. And having gone through those hard times, that's why I'm on the other side of this, and I can speak to what that means. So I God is in all of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
intentionally. And we have to understand that part of who we are in our human psyche is how God made us. And there's nothing wrong with experiencing sadness. Christ was abandoned by his friends. He felt sad. He was abandoned by God for a minute to do the sovereign work that he was put here on earth to do. So we have to kind of to align ourselves with the totality of our godly design makeup, and some of that involves dealing with failure,
Mhm,
dealing
mhm.
with depression and sadness, etc.
Yeah, I challenge my colleagues in ministry because we've come out of a good 2.5 decades, about 25 years of that kind of teaching that became very, very popular, especially among people of color.
Yeah.
I know it. I'm familiar with it. Familiar with some of the teachers, and we lost that balance, that sense that Jesus
Mhm.
says, "In the world you will have tribulation," and
That's
we
right.
were we were being fed this notion that having faith exempts us from the realities of human experience, and
Right.
yet, the words of the Apostle Paul, my strength, God speaking to him, my strength is made perfect or perfected in your weakness.
Yes.
So it it
Amen.
it it frees us when we
It does.
embrace those weaknesses, when we embrace the realities of all human experience and understand that God's power is made available to us to take us through it. And we discover things about ourselves along the way, things that we would not discover when everything is going wonderful and
Mm.
well. I really appreciate you sharing that because not many are willing to talk about it, especially
Yeah.
people of faith. I look NAACP award. I mean, we can go on the accolades that you rightly deserve, that you've earned so well. It is a pleasure speaking to you. And I hope that this is not the last opportunity we have to converse, that you'll be back on again. Is there anything that you would like to convey to our audience as we close this conversation?
Well, I would like to say that being a creative and being endowed with certain kinds of abilities is sometimes I feel like it's God given, but just because it's God given doesn't mean that there's a relative ease to
Mhm.
how to show that. And I don't want people to look at my accolades. I don't want people to look at my accomplishments. Like again, if you're Michael Jordan, we win, right? So that's getting old to me, right?
Mhm.
Um, what's more relevant and important is how we show up in the world, in our belief system, in
Mhm.
our love, and in our grace for others in the way that God has shown us. So, if nothing else, the opportunity to work in an industry that, in many ways, people call dark, I think we have to show up and be the representation of the God that we serve. And the whole, oh, we may be the only Bible people ever read. Yeah, but you got to show up in excellence too.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so you want to represent God in excellence, but you want to show up in the mercy and grace that you've been shown. So that is what I'm practicing as a creative who happens to work in this business. Everything else, it really doesn't matter because it's all going to burn up in the fire anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that is what I hope that people walk away from is less celebrity because ain't nobody bigger than Jesus, and more love and grace as we show up in all that God has endowed us with for ultimately his purpose, which leads others to say, let your light so shine before men that they
Absolutely.
may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. That is my challenge and the only thing that I grapple with on a daily basis.
Yeah, we've been gifted with certain talents and abilities, but we are to show up as points of light
Amen.
in darkness. Wow. Thank you so much, Christine. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. And like I said, this can't be the last time we have to do it again. But as we close the program, thank you for coming on the show, of course, Christine, and thank you, our listeners, for tuning in weekly for these great conversations with some incredible people. If you like what you heard, you know the deal. Subscribe, like, and share. We hope you'll join us for our next conversation right here on the A.R. Bernard Show. I'm your host, A.R. Bernard. Until next time, God bless.